This picture portrays mass incarceration in the United States. Mass incarceration is defined as the extreme rates and disparity of people confined in prisons and jails. Today I'm going to discuss the statistics of incarceration, the cause of the disparity of people incarcerated, positives and negatives of incarceration, and a solution to the problem. As the global leader of incarceration, the United States has become defined by mass incarceration. First of all, I want to discuss the overall incarceration statistics in our country. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, there was an estimated 2.2 million people incarcerated in the United States, with about 1.6 million in prisons and 600,000 in jails in 2014. What are the majority of these people serving for? Well, drug offenses, with about 50% of males and 59% of males incarcerated for crimes related to drugs. With rates this high for drug offenses, it is surprising to discover that 97% of incarcerated people serve a sentence longer than a year. Now, it is important to consider what categories of people are found in prisons and jails. Out of 100,000 people in the population, 53 white women, 64 Latina women, 109 black women, 465 white men, 1,091 Latino men, and 2,724 black men will be incarcerated. This representation shows that black men are 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than white men. It is also important to note the discrepancy of sentence length for the different races. In 2014, African Americans were 6 times more likely to serve longer than a year than white men were. Roughly 82% of imprisoned persons in 2014 were male and 8% were female. Sadly, there were 4,200 juveniles, 17 and under, in jails and 1,000 juveniles in prisons. There is not specific data on current class percentages incarcerated. However, it is common knowledge that race and class often intermingle, where most whites enjoy higher classes and most minorities suffer in lower classes. Therefore, the percentage of lower classes in prisons and jails is much higher than the upper classes. Next, I want to explain why these disparities occur using several different deviance theories: the social conflict theory and Hershey's control theory. The first of these is the social conflict theory of deviance. It is important to note that Massionis describes deviance as the violation of cultural norms. What is considered deviance, who is deviant, and the consequences for deviance are all based on society. So you may be thinking, what does deviance have to do with mass incarceration? Well, crime is one category of deviance. Therefore, criminal behavior is based on how society perceives and responds to behavior. For example, there was a time in our country when consuming alcohol and smoking marijuana were illegal, yet today, in many states, they are legal. Also, in other parts of the world, it is legal for men to physically abuse their wives as they are seen as property. The social conflict theory of deviance explains that societal norms perpetuate a cycle of oppression by the majority onto minorities. Firstly, people who threaten the rich and powerful are labeled as deviant. For example, an African American that steals from a wealthy white man would be considered a criminal. On the other hand, white-collar crimes from high-class white people that harm the poorer public are rarely seen as crimes. In the cases of embezzlement, business fraud, and bribery, only about half of these white-class white criminals ever spend a single day in jail. According to the Bureau of Statistics, they end up paying less than 10% of fines owed by hiding or transferring assets. This is just one example of white privilege in our justice system. Another example of white privilege is the second aspect of social conflict theory, stating that the higher classes have more resources to resist criminal consequences. For instance, the wealthy have the power to hire the most expensive and the best attorneys. These attorneys spend more time and also are able to get biased juries that can help to get these wealthy people out of these criminal consequences. Therefore, more lower class people get convicted and sentenced to prison with their public offenders that don't give them this time. The third component of the social conflict theory is that society believes that laws are natural and rarely consider whether the fairness of them. At one point in our history, women were not allowed to vote. At that time, society did not question whether this law was morally right or not, and instead chose to believe that women were innately inferior. The other theory for the disparity of race and class in mass incarceration is Hershey's control theory, which according to Massionis includes the concepts of social attachment, opportunity, involvement, and beliefs. In order to explain these four concepts, I will consider an African American teenage boy living with his single parent mother. Their odds of living in a poor neighborhood are incredibly high for the two of them. Since they live in a poor neighborhood, there may be a lack of quality jobs with a lack of quality pay. His mother might have to work multiple jobs or work long hours to provide for the two of them. Since he is often alone, he has poor social attachment to family, does not have someone to help him with school, and has not been taught respect for authority. Now, I'm not saying this is the mother's fault, but instead the fault should be placed on the inequality in society. The family most likely does not have money to pay for sports, so the boy is less involved and has more time for deviant behavior. This is simply one example how racial minorities and the lower class are more often incarcerated than whites. Now that we know why there is a disparity in prisons and jails, I will discuss the positive and negative effects of incarceration. The three positive effects of incarceration deal with the justification of punishment: retribution, deterrence, and societal protection. Retribution is an act of societal vengeance in which the offender suffers as much as the suffering they caused. Retribution keeps victims or families of victims from seeking vengeance themselves, and instead allowing the justice system to seek their vengeance. Incarceration deters offenders and others from breaking the law in the future by teaching that crime does not pay. Lastly, incarceration protects society by confining criminals and making them unable to commit further crimes. The major negative effects of incarceration are the self-fulfilling prophecy, breaking of social ties, and the lack of preparation for entering the real world upon release. The self-fulfilling prophecy is simple. If you treat people like animals and criminals, they tend to live up to those expectations. According to the very Institute of Justice, the total cost of incarceration is about $80 billion to taxpayers. However, I do think that incarceration should be our go-to for violent crimes, but the nature of prisons needs to change. Prisoners should be given less downtime by performing jobs at the jail or prison to pay for their living expenses. They should also have to take online classes to receive their GED, community college credits, or take trade classes like mechanics. Prison guards should be held more accountable. They should be charged as criminals if they are caught doing illegal favors for inmates or allowing any bad behavior or being negligent. First-time offenders of minor offenses should serve probationary sentences in the community, and drug addicts should be placed in rehabilitation programs. We as a society also need to change the de facto segregation that occurs in neighborhoods, schools, and occupations. Tax incentives should be given to business owners that open shops in low-income neighborhoods and hire local workers instead of outsourcing, especially outsourcing to other countries. Higher salaries should also be offered to more qualified teachers in low-income areas, and there should be more equality in the resources in schools. It is sad that our country has come to be known as the incarceration nation. Even more tragic is the fact that minorities continue to be oppressed and are overrepresented in our prisons and jails. Hopefully, the cycle of oppression will end and future generations in the United States will witness a decline in mass incarceration. With the statistics, causes of disparity, and advantages and disadvantages of incarceration, it is easy to see the effect society has on mass incarceration and the effect that mass incarceration has on our society.